At this time, let's begin today's webinar, How Citizenship and Sustainability Influence Cultural Change. I would now like to introduce your first speaker today, Kathi Irvine, Senior Consultant with Miller Consultants. Kathi, you have the floor.
Great. Thanks very much, Jessica, and welcome everyone. We're really pleased to have a delightful panel of speakers to present to you, and just delighted that you've all decided to join us. So we're joined today by John Edelman, who is the Managing Director of Global Engagement and Corporate Responsibility. John was appointed in 2010 as the Managing Director of Global Engagement and Corporate Responsibility, a new position focused on Edelman's global citizenship, sustainability, and corporate responsibility. He also serves as President of DJE Edelman Family Foundation. We also have Alan VanderMolen, who is the Vice Chairman of DJE Holdings. As Vice Chairman of DJE Holdings, Alan is responsible for the holdings' growth businesses, including Edelman Digital, Edelman Berland, which is a research arm, Edelman's award-winning sister firm Zeno, and Edelman Canada and Latin America. Alan also oversees the firm's global citizenship program. And we also have Kathi Miller, who is the CEO of Miller Consultants. Kathi's a psychologist and focuses the work that she does with Miller Consultants on organizational innovation through people. And I'll share a little bit more about Kathi later on. Let's get a sense of who's joining us today. And Jessica, if you could pull up a couple of polls as well as that map. So we'd like you to weigh in here and let us know what's the size of your organization. That way you'll kind of get a sense of where everyone is coming from, as well as the industry that you're from. And what we'd really like to do is have you in the chat box identify what city, town, community that you're calling in from. So take a couple of minutes. Great, we've got lots of people phoning or calling in, so that's great. Also want to point out that I'm at in the Banff Center at the Peter Lougheed Institute for Leadership, and I've got a group that's joined with me here as well. So thanks very much, and what I'd like to do now is pass it over to Kathi. And as a research practitioner in the area of organizational leadership and culture, Kathi's been working for the past 6 years, gathering data to discern what kind of leadership and culture support sustainable organizations. That data has in turn allowed us to work with organizations and their leaders on the best practices. So Kathi, over to you.
Thank you, Kathi, and welcome everybody. We're so pleased to have such a good-sized group of people with us today. I met the Edelmans about a year ago, partly as a result of the research that we've been doing over the last several years. Over the last several years, we've been researching organizational culture and sustainability, and what it is about organizational culture that supports a company's being able to effectively implement their sustainability strategies. We've worked with a couple of our research associates from the Harvard Business School, George Serafim and Bob Eccles, and we're also working with our business partners, KKS Advisory out of London, England, and I see that we've got a couple of those people on the line today, so welcome to our business partners and our research partners. What we found as we worked on this research on organizational culture is that there are several stakeholder groups that are very important, but there's one stakeholder group that's critical, and Jessica, you can go to the next slide, and that's employees. What we find over and over again is that employees are probably the most critical stakeholder group in some respects because companies depend on their talent. They depend on their employees to be engaged and productive. Employees become advocates for the company, and therefore they form relationships with customers that influence customer behaviors. So while through our work with KKS, we're doing work on a number of different stakeholder groups, we very much look at the employee as the critical stakeholder group. So what we did a couple of years ago, as a result of some preliminary research, has developed an assessment instrument of corporate culture based on employee perceptions. And we found that that assessment instrument can actually differentiate companies that are leaders in sustainability strategy from the rest of the pack. And just to get us started and to kind of introduce the topic of employees and what's important about employees, I'd like to show you a couple of questions from the Scala instrument that we developed to assess company culture. And I'd like for you to look at these questions and respond from the standpoint of your own companies, if you will. All right, we're getting a sense of what you think about your own company in terms of two of the most important scales, I think, in the assessment instrument. The scale that looks at the level of trust in the company is incredibly important in terms of differentiating the leaders from the rest of the pack. And the idea that the employees understand the values of the company, another huge differentiator between the leading companies and the ones that lag behind. And that leads me to talk to you about the work that we did with Edelman. Our research associates and I wrote a chapter for a book you'll see down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. The book's title is Leading Sustainable Change. It's actually coming out March of this year, and you can take a look at the abstract for that book on Amazon now if you'd like to. But the chapter looked at chief sustainability officers, and we did some work on what happens when a company starts this journey towards sustainability, both in terms of how the employees and the culture supports or hinders that journey, as well as what are the responsibilities of the chief sustainability officers and so forth. And that's how we got in touch with the Edelmans, because they are involved in this journey and they're going to talk about that journey today. So as you could see from the questions that we just asked you on the two questions that come from the longer assessment, the Scala assessment, we have found that trust and understanding the values of the company incredibly important. And that brings me to Alan, who's going to talk to you about the famous Trust Barometer. He's got some new results from the 2015 Trust Barometer research, and I'm going to let him share that with you now. Alan?
Thanks very much, Kathi. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and a special shout out to the person joining us from Columbus, Ohio, OH. Go Buckeyes. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't familiar, Edelman every year does a global study called the Trust Barometer, and we started this 15 years ago with an objective to understand the relative level of trust between business, government, NGOs, and media, so kind of four institutions of civil society, because we were reacting to Enron and WorldCom and Arthur Andersen issues, and we wanted specifically to understand the trust benefit or deficit that business enjoyed or didn't enjoy versus those other institutions of civil society to enable business to better operate or better build trust to actually pursue an economic agenda, their own or a societal economic agenda. Next slide, please. In this year's study, which you can see on the right-hand side of each one of these boxes, we didn't have any change in the relative order. So the most trusted institution globally are NGOs, followed by business, media declining and in the third spot, and government in the fourth spot. And I guess I would tell you a couple things here. The percentages you see representing percent of trust is top four boxes on a scale of 1 to 9. So the percentage of our respondents who said they trust the institution to do what is right on a scale of 1 to 9, so 6, 7, 8, or 9. The interesting thing for me as I look at this, and I guess I would encourage you to look at, is the trust gap between business and government, which is the second largest gap we've ever had when looking at this. And some of this is driven in Western Europe and the United States by budget issues. Quite frankly, the inability of governments to get budgets passed in the United States, the battling between sovereign budgets and, let's say, Germany versus Greece and helping to bail out Greece. But I think the broader trend here is because business is trusted more than government, increasingly business has a responsibility, or there's an expectation of business to start to carry more water, specifically on the issues of sustainability. And I just want to kind of underscore that as, let's say, a 5,000-foot piece of context. Next slide, please. Now, looking a little bit more closely at trust in business, there are 4 factors that drive trust in business. And the first one is the industry sector you're in. So some industries are trusted more than others, and I'll get to that in a second. The second thing is the type of enterprise you're in. And I noticed today on the poll that we have a lot of small enterprises up here. Specifically, I saw a lot of organizations that had fewer than 500 employees. So privately held companies and family-held companies tend to be more trusted than publicly traded companies or government-linked businesses or government-invested businesses. The third kind of factor that determines trust in a business is the quality and trustworthiness of its leadership, not simply the CEO, but let's say the C-suite and actually line managers. And the fourth thing that factors into trust in a business is its country of origin, where you tend to have countries that have very large and well-known brands and kind of a quality sheen around the country, have companies that are more trusted than, let's say, companies that are based in emerging markets. And I think part of that is, you know, at the bottom of the list is Mexico, Brazil, Russia, China, India. And I think a lot of that is simply because these businesses, these countries don't have globally recognized brands. And I think the other factor is a lot of these markets are perceived as being not particularly transparent when it comes to business dealings. So kind of 4 hygienic factors that drive trust of particular businesses. Next slide, please. So 3 years ago, we actually wanted to start to dimensionalize trust a little bit. And specifically, instead of just looking at trust as a bipolar issue, meaning how much do you trust each institution to do what is right, we actually wanted to look at the attributes that build trust in business over the long term. And I won't have you look at the 16 attributes. You can do that on your own time. What's interesting for me is what I call the 5 buckets of trust, or trusted behaviors. And I think this is instructional for today's discussion on sustainability because these are listed from least important at the bottom to most important at the top. So operational drivers of your business, the things that you're expected to do every day as a business, are almost price of entry to start to build trust or to have trust as an organization. The next step up for me is purpose, and that is conducting your business in a way that meets the needs and expectations of society, but also having a purpose beyond your commercial motive. And I think this has become table stakes, so you can't build trusted relationships without having high-quality operations and having a purpose beyond an immediate commercial motive. And I think this is a direct reaction to what we've seen for a decrease in trust in government, that governments have kind of lost the mandate or lost trust to drive a lot of agendas around sustainability. And therefore, businesses are looking to carry a lot of that water. And I think that translates into purpose being table stakes to build trust in an organization. The third, right in the middle in terms of important factors, are the quality of products and services that your organization puts into a market. And over the kind of 10 years that we've done this study, products and services used to be the most important driver of trust. Now those are dropping down, and they're dropping down in importance to the deference of the level to which your business is engaged with the stakeholders, that are most important to your success and the levels of integrity that your business uses when operating. So I just want you to think a little bit about those 5 big bucket factors and the reaction in relationship to those factors as you look at business being the second most trusted sector and a decrease in trust in government, and as that relates to driving operations and sustainable behaviors around your operations. Next slide, please.
So this is an interesting time for you, all of you listeners, to pause for a minute and really reflect on how trusted do you think your industry is, not your company, but the industry in which you operate. So take a couple of minutes and vote in on that, and then Alan will show some of the results that they've got in their research. All right, thanks for that. Alan, comments on what you're seeing there in the polls?
Well, to be honest, I lost my glasses, so I can't read it very well.
Well, we do have some down, a couple down in the in the 2s and the 3s.
Those are probably the lawyers. I would tell you that this lines up pretty much with the spread that we see in terms of trust in industry sectors, that you tend to have a cluster at the 6 and 7. You tend to have not a lot of respondents think that their industry or particular industry is a top 2 box. You tend to see the clusters around the 3rd and 4th box. So statistically, this lines up with what we see in our data.
Right.
So for the big reveal now, if we can go to the next slide, let's look at relative levels of trust in industries. And this is difficult to read, but let me give you the headlines from my point of view. We've been doing this study for 15 years, and every year we've done it, technology has been the most trusted sector on a global basis. That's generally because our respondents, whether that's the general population respondent or the informed public respondents, tend to view technology as bettering their lives or bettering their businesses. So in terms of your life, technology and, say, kind of consumer products allows me to access my entertainment, my news and information, my family, those kinds of things on my smartphone and mobile device. So we tend to trust technology as a betterment of our lives. In business terms, we see technology as driving product innovation, driving efficiencies in our business, those kinds of things. Last year, for the first time, we saw trust in one country declined so far in technology that it's no longer the most trusted industry in that country, and that was Japan. I think we're on the front end of seeing technology lose its sheen, driven by issues around data privacy and security. And I think we'll continue to see trust in technology as a sector decline, and I think other industries that rely heavily on technology for CRM kinds of things and product innovation, namely, I think health services and financial services, will start to see some real issues with trust as it relates to technology. The other thing, I guess, that I would call to your attention here is down at the bottom, all the way on the right-hand side, is you see that the least trusted institution is media. And I think you see an interesting thing here. You see a decline in trust in media as an institution. We also see a decline in trust in media as an industry. And I think what this essentially says to me is that increasingly mass media is under so much pressure in terms of its business model and performance on its basic businesses that news organizations tend to be shrinking. Their business model is under pressure, and because of that, they tend to be laying off editorial staff. So trust in media as a trusted source of news and information declining as it shifts to entertainment to drive more of its revenue and more of its content. So that's just kind of my macro hygienic factors, and now we'll go to the next slide and kick it back over to Kathi, I believe.
I'd like to pause just a second here before we go on to the rest of the program and find out if the audience does have any questions for Alan about the data that he just presented. I find it to be really fascinating, and I want to be sure that everybody has an opportunity to type in their questions. So if you do have some questions for Alan, just type them in. and he'll be glad to answer them, I'm sure. Like he said, he knows the data. He truly knows the data. So we'll keep our eye on the Q&A box, and we'll come back to you, Alan, as people type in their questions. All right, while we're waiting for people to type in any questions that they might have on what Alan just presented, I wanted to go on and talk again about how our research dovetails with the research that Alan just talked about. Alan's talking about kind of what we've been calling the macro level when it comes to thinking about trust and thinking about organizations. And what we've done with our research is look more at the micro level. We go into organizations, one organization at a time, to look at what's going on within those organizations. And what we find when we do that is that there are pretty predictable stages that companies go through when they're starting to really make a commitment to sustainability. And those stages, there are three that we highlight. One is compliance. What we find is that normally when a company gets started with sustainability, it's all about the regulations. It's all about doing what the government asks for, doing what the vendors, if it's a supply chain, what the customer asks for. It's all about responding or being compliant. And then what we find is that many companies move to a second stage, which we've labeled efficiency. And in the efficiency stage, what's happening is companies are saying, hey, okay, we can comply with the regulations, but maybe we can do better than that. Maybe we can save money through this sustainability work. Maybe we can reduce our energy costs. Maybe we can reduce waste. Maybe we can impact the bottom line in the company. And that's what we're calling efficiency. The companies at this point are looking to become better, more efficient at what they do in order to impact their bottom line. And then the last phase, and this is the one that we really are digging into and are very interested in, is the innovation stage. Now, not every company gets to this stage, but what happens in the innovation stage is companies now start saying, wait a minute, maybe not only can we save money and impact our bottom line, maybe we can actually solve some problems through our products and services. So they take a look at what's going on in the world, they take a look at what's going on in their own customer base and say, how can our services and our products address these issues for our customers and our clients? And they then usually couple their sustainability journey with innovation. They a lot of times innovate their business models, and this is a very interesting stage to look into. So I see we've got a couple of questions for Alan, so let's just pause here before we move on and maybe get to some of those questions.
So they're both related to the energy industry, which isn't surprising with the debate we have right now with oil prices, debate we have around the environmental impact of fracking, debates we have around energy security and self-sufficiency around energy. So to the first question, oil and gas, we do not pull out as a separate segment in this data as it relates to energy. But certainly you tend to see trust in energy broadly being related to a lot of innovations around sustainable energy and alternatives to fossil fuels, as there are issues, environmental issues and the such around fossil fuels. The second question is related to, again, the use of technology for the energy industry, and it's actually interesting. We looked at a number of questions, and if you go to our website, edelman.com, and look for Trust Barometer, you can see a series of questions we did this year related to innovation and technological innovation in a couple industries. And energy is one that popped up as having maybe not as great a license to innovate, if you will, in particular when it's using technology around controversial energy sources, specifically oil sands and hydraulic fracking. So I'd say this is a live discussion. I'd say that energy companies broadly are using technologies to look at development of sustainable fuels and also making sure that the acquisition of fossil fuels and the use of them are much more in line with the sustainability agenda.
Okay, thank you. All right, compliance, efficiency, innovation, when we look at how organizations take on the sustainability journey. Let's get a look at from you again. Can we bring up the poll, Jessica? Where do you think your organization is? Remember, compliance is regulatory, efficiency is saving money, impact on the bottom line, innovation is addressing problems, world problems or issues with services and products. Well, it's refreshing to see that only a few of you are in compliance. Not that that's a bad thing. Compliance is usually the place where companies start, and it's a good place to start. But it's also nice to see that some of the people on the line think their companies have moved on into efficiency and even into innovation, which again is a very fascinating, I find in our research that to be a fascinating stage the companies go through. So thank you for that. All right, and this brings me to our conversation with John Edelman. And John is the person that we interviewed for our chapter on CSOs in the book that we referred to earlier. And it was very interesting for me to spend a lot of time talking with John, actually, in preparation of the book. And I'm going to ask John some of the same questions that we asked him in the interview. So this is going to be kind of a conversational part of our program. And John, what I wanted to start with is, I know that you've told me so much about the journey that Edelman's been on, and it truly has been a journey from hearing you talk about it. Where do you think you started with this journey? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think we definitely started in the compliance phase. I took my role on in 2010, and one of the first things that came on my table was a third-party assessment that more and more in this world of sustainability, clients or customers are using third-party platforms like EcoVadis or SEDEX to do one audit of all your policies and practices. And so based on that, and then also we're getting more and more RFPs that were asking questions about what are your environmental goals, what are your human rights policies, what's your supplier code of conduct. In fact, for 58 years, Edelman itself, as a company, did not have a supplier code of conduct for our business partners. So clearly, we were reacting to what was happening in the external environment, whether it was clients or whether it was legislative directives. Because if you operate globally, as we do, you have to be sensitive to what's happening around the world as well. And then more and more, there are certain legislative directives relating to accounting transparency, not to get technical, but in general, it clearly was a compliance orientation. And, you know, we had no policies, we had no, very disconnected, we were doing lots of volunteerism, but one of the first ahas was it took us 3 months or 4 months to talk on a global basis with our offices to learn what your volunteerism and pro bono was. A lot of people considered sponsorship pro bono. A lot of people considered hands-on volunteerism pro bono. So just the first part of the journey was to get a common language. And from there, once you get a common language, and we also made a commitment early on to do a GRI report, that also put things in perspective that we had to really be looking holistically at what citizenship was all about.
Let me ask you a question, something I hope you'll be willing to talk about this. Something that you told me when I interviewed you for the book is you mentioned that a research report came out in 2010 about sustainability advisory firms, and the research report called out Edelman for its lack of having an updated sustainability report. What impact did that have on the company? And
no, it was a really another aha, because we, you know, as we have an external practice that focuses on sustainability and these types of issues, so you can't be authentic in which you're talking about sustainability unless you look inside first to try to address what you're doing. And yes, that research report came out and it called out we had not updated our citizenship report. So all of these things together added up to the fact that my appointment in 2010 came at the right time at the right place, because now 4 years later, 5 years later, things have moved a lot more, where there's even more expectations from stakeholders and legislative directives, etc. So all these things, the key success factor in sustainability is you have to be authentic in what you're doing and be honest in how you look at it and what you tackle and then make progress along the journey.
John and I talked at length about the importance of transparency and what that means, and what that means to Edelman, and what that means to the best organizations, and that is willingness to talk about their warts as well as their successes as well as their failures. And I knew John would be very willing to talk about getting called out in that report, because that's something that Edelman's dedicated to, is transparency. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about what happened subsequent to your being appointed to the position, John. You started out with the compliance stage, like many companies do, but then you started up a broader initiative, and you've told me a little bit about your employee citizenship program. What can you share with our audience about the employee citizenship program? What led you to start this program? What's it look like? Can you give us some information about that?
Sure. As was said earlier, employees are a key stakeholder in this whole citizenship journey. So as we got into the process of building our citizenship, we had more and more interest from employees because an important part is to actively engage your employees. So we created a community grant program for our employees. It was one of the early things was to try to create some quick wins to build some credibility. So we created this grant program which allowed $2,500 based on employee solicitations of grants, because as a company there was no money available from the center to support things employees are passionate about. So this was a major factor in us to create this community grants program, which now over the 5 years we've given over $750,000 to over 300 organizations around the world. So the employee engagement and then that laddered up to what you could do beyond in terms of trying to bring your employees more engaged with the day-to-day activities. Like we have green teams, and one of the issues with green teams is that there was some participation with the same people, so they created this whole green team engagement, which is also important to get, because we as a global company, we have to operate globally but execute locally. So there was a large participation of green teams, so every office has a green team, so we had to collaborate with them on things, and that's some of the parts of things that we've introduced as part of our, and as well as the carbon footprinting that we did. We did not do a carbon footprint before, and now we have 3 years of history based on our greenhouse gas emissions on a global basis, and that's an important part of being engaged in citizenship, to really be accountable on all these issues, because these things are being asked, as I said before, whether it's from stakeholders or legislative directives or even our employees. As a matter of fact, we survey our employees every year, and last year, we had an increase of our employee support of 78% from 73%, that Edelman having a citizenship program is an important reason for them to join Edelman. And what we found in this year's survey, which is driving what we're trying to do this year, that our employees were saying you're not enough doing to operate your offices more sustainably. So now we're doing a whole environmental working group to come up with office practices and policies that can engage our offices to operate more sustainably. So all these things have added to this larger journey, and this, now that we're in the efficiency stage, is that we actually were able to create benchmarks based on how we're doing on some of these issues, which I can talk to later as you further on the conversation.
Let me ask you a question, John. You talked about, I think that this global volunteerism and global citizenship program is really interesting. And I wonder, can you give us an example of something that's being done as part of that? Can you tell us a story about something that's happening in that program?
Yeah, there's one of the wonderful grants that we awarded was to our Madrid office. It went into support of a program called Africable. Lamu is an island off of Kenya, in which 30% of the citizens are malnourished and 65% live on less than $2 a day. This whole Africable organization is focused on really engagement of women, social and economic engagement of women. So that grant is going to actually fund lighting and water for the school building and the dining hall. So that's a small amount of money making a sizable impact. So that's one of the, and we have stories like that on the grants, and then we also do a number of pro bono things around the world too, because a key part of employee engagement is the pro bono that you do on making impact in the communities in which you operate.
Great. That's great. And also, you and I talked about your skill-based volunteering program, and I wondered if you could describe some of the what that means, and a little bit more about the skill-based volunteering that's going on as part of your sustainability and citizenship program.
This is a great example of employees really having a major part of input. Like initially, we had a 4-hour dedicated pro bono time. We got a request from Global HR to try to get it extended to 8 hours. So then we went through the executive leadership to get 8 hours approved. So now our whole pivot is towards skill-based volunteerism, and it's everything from trying to, my father was a veteran, so we're trying to do some things to help with veteran hiring. Other employees are doing leveraging our skill sets like master narrative and stories. One of the examples that Alan and the Latin American region evolved was this thing called Business Plus, where they're going to identify access to education, and they're going to create a pro bono project around access to education in which they're going to help. There's a counterpart organization to Teach for America in Latin America, but they're going to leverage their skill sets. They want to create Teach for Latin America to develop resources to set up a school in rural areas. So those are the number of things that we do, because the key part of pro bono volunteers is where you leverage your skill set. Hands-on is great, but leveraging the skill set where you can build capacity where an organization wouldn't be able to get the services otherwise, that's the new wave of community engagement and volunteerism, and that's more and more stories are being asked about. In fact, if you do reporting, which a lot of companies do, there's actually a statement in the G4, which is the new standard for reporting, where they're asking about community impact, and they're calling out pro bono and skill-based volunteerism as an indicator that you have to leverage against as part of your ongoing commitment to sustainability and corporate responsibility.
Okay, thank you very much. So you started in compliance, you've moved to efficiency, and you've learned a lot along the way. What would you tell our audience members that are in the compliance phase about the key learnings as you move from compliance to efficiency?
I think a key learning, this is a great segue, because being in the public relations area, I thought we could do culture change within a year. As I went to functions and activities and talked to the community of people in sustainability, they said it's a 3 to 5 year culture change. I said, no problem, we'll be able to do it in a year. But in reality, it's taken 3 to 5 years to be able to do some of the things we're able to do now. So I think the key factor is to know where you are in your journey, and then, as I said, take on small wins. Like in our case, it was the community grants program. If you do a report like we do, we have data. So now we track our data on hours of volunteerism, participation of volunteerism, and we also, because we've done a carbon footprint for 3 years, we're able to track greenhouse gas emissions. So now we have a 3-year history of doing that. So I think going slow, understanding the data, and then building quick wins, because it is a culture change. You're going to have early passionate advocates at the employee level. You're going to have people, senior leadership, who are supporters, but you have to go slowly and build the momentum, so then the buzz becomes larger and broader. And then, because the stakeholder expectations are always there, the government directives, the client, requests, so that already is there. But when you add the employee engagement, as you said, as a key driver, then things can really change. So I think it's taking a good perspective of where you are, going slow, and then building up on early wins to then build broader credibility and going beyond.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is something that I've heard John say, 10 times at least in the time that I've had with him. This is one of his favorite sayings, I found. Evolution, not revolution. Tell us what that means to you, John.
Well, it sort of reflects what I've been sharing, is that evolution is, sustainability is here to stay. It's a major expectation around the world. Corporations and employees want good corporate citizens. But you have to go slowly. As I said, we're now at a place 5 years into the journey where now we have good data based on what our offices have been doing on volunteerism and greenhouse gas emissions. And we've added training because sustainability of employees is an important, productivity and training of employees is a key success factor in building a sustainable company. So evolution is going slow, building critical early wins, but gradually moving forward and making gradual change and building upon the success. So it's really evolution, not revolution, and it's a constant journey. Even 5 years, there's things we still need to do, and so I would focus on one or two things early on to build credibility. In our case, it was the community grants and doing the greenhouse gas emissions reporting on a global basis were early steps in the process. So I think and it is a constant journey, and you just have to make progress, and as long as you're making progress, that's the journey.
Okay, let me ask you one more question about that, and then we'll wrap it up and move to some questions and answers. But that is, do you think that this is true for all companies? We've been talking with some companies that claim that what they're doing is complete transformation. So they're revolutionizing their business models and everything. Do you think that that's possible for some companies, or do you think that this evolution, not revolution, is the better way to go no matter what? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think evolution, not revolution, is the way to go because, especially in our case, citizenship as a function was brand new, and you had to build buy-in, you had to build little success after success, and you had to deliver on the success. So I think to do an overall transformation, that's taking off too much, because if you don't go gradually and monitor where you are, you can commit to too much and then be greenwashing, which is what you don't want to do.
That's
because
absolutely true.
The only thing you have is your accountability and the reputation to what you're doing. So you have to be accountable and acknowledge where you fell short and then make progress. So I don't think, like I thought PR, we can move fast, but in my own experience, it's taken 5 years to get to a place where we now have infrastructure, we have policies and systems, we have leadership support, we're at the C-suite, guiding on certain policies and practices. So it's taken 5 years to really get to a place where you can really now look forward to your innovation stage, which is where, but I don't think so. I think it's unrealistic to think you can make change overnight, because I thought we could, and it's taken us 5 years so far, and we're still learning and growing day to day.
So some of us, and I'll include me in it, are kind of arrogant about our ability to do things quickly, perhaps. All right, let me turn this over to Kathi Irvine to ask the final wrap-up questions, and then we'll go to questions and answers. So please start writing your questions in the box so we can be sure and address all of your questions.
Great.
Kathi?
Thanks, Kathi. And so as you're coming up with your questions, John, what we'd like you to do is really, in summary, so what are the keys to your success?
Okay. I don't know we have a slide, but I think, as I said, I think the first learning is here. Okay. You definitely have to look at sustainability holistically. I took over the role in 2010, and I thought it was doing a carbon footprint and doing an updated report on our citizenship, but it's actually about supplier diversity. It's actually about procurement. It's actually about diversity. So that's number one. Citizenship is holistic. Number two, you have to assess objectively where you are, as I've referenced before, and take small steps to build credibility. A key thing is your data. Data drives action. As I said, we now have 5 years of data where we now have a citizenship score for each of our offices, which is part of our citizenship accountability. Every office is able to deliver against the volunteerism participation and the greenhouse gas emissions and the training. Then on top of that, the evolution, not revolution, I've talked about. A big part is as I said, as I referenced, you build upon small successes and then integrate slowly for surely. But I think most importantly, you have to be honest and authentic. You take baby steps. You make progress, and then you may change direction and move forward. Like an easy example of that is we made a commitment a year or so ago to do 15,000 hours of pro bono volunteerism through the billion and change. It was unrealistic. We had 20,000 hours, but we only had 10,000 of pro bono. So then we revamped, and now we have the focus, where most of our focus is to skill-based volunteerism, and a commitment of 40,000 hours globally, and we just did a tracking to date, and already in this way, we're already at we had 22,000 hours of training last year, of skill-based volunteerism last year. This year we're already at 20,000, so we will surpass our 22,000 that we made all of last year, because we were honest, we adjusted, and we said we're now going to focus on the skill-based volunteerism. So I think you have to be accountable, you have to acknowledge where you fell short, and then you have to make commitments and action plans to drive forward to the next level, because it is part of the journey. So
John, can I add just a comment here? I think that one of the other things that John really had to do was create the business case for the organization. I think too often times, both within our firm and within our client firms, there's an inability to create the business case for the C-suite or the P&L owners as to why you're going down the sustainability journey. I think they understand the compliance-based behaviors pretty well, because that's forced sustainability, if you will. I think where we've been effective in kind of accelerating the journey is when we started to talk about deriving value from our values. So the business proposition was, we want to derive value from our values for our people, for our clients, and for our communities. And once we started to frame it that simply, we could look at our activities in one of those three buckets and start to measure impact, and do it in a way where we could merchandise results of activities directly back to the P&L owners. And I think that was very helpful.
Great. Great, thank you. So offering up our last about 10 minutes here, really interested in opening this up to our audience. And what I'd offer is that you can type your question into the Q&A box, but we're certainly open to have just audio questions as well. So we might not be able to do that, if I remember correctly. All right, so we're going to be forced to having you type your questions in. Really do take advantage of our opportunity here with John and Alan and Kathi to get some ideas and recommendations. All right, we've got a question here from Jeff. Is there a measurable, and I'm going to have to put my glasses on, sorry. Is there a measurable relationship between organizational sustainability efforts and the Trust Barometer scores? Do the efforts and plans transfer or translate?
The short answer is yes, and they do that specifically in, I think, 3 of the buckets of trusted behaviors. They do that in the bucket around purpose-driven behavior. They do that around the integrity behaviors, and they do that around engagement behaviors. Now, that doesn't translate into the scores by trust in industry just yet, but when we do this methodology related directly to a specific company, we can directly link their sustainability activities to how they're scoring in trust and how they're delivering or performing versus expectations of their stakeholders against their specific behaviors as a company.
Great. A question from Sandy is, how has your sustainable journey impacted your cultural journey? And can employees articulate between the two?
Well, one of the things that was, citizenship is our 6th value, which is huge. So citizenship is among our value statement. And I think in terms of the culture, I think the fact that, employees, because when I did global HR before I did the citizenship, and the question that I heard then was, what about training and development? Now the question we hear today is, what is the company allowing me to do to give back to the communities in which I operate? So I think there is an interrelationship to what people who are looking to go to work at a place and how a company is taking citizenship and moving forward in its journey.
I would also just add here that, and John mentioned it, but I would like to underscore the importance of having citizenship as a value, because that really started to change behavior of the P&L leaders, and it started to build expectation from the bottom up and responsibility from the top down to deliver. So when we explicitly added citizenship as our sixth value, I think that changed dramatically the operating environment for John and his team, made it easier.
I'd like to add to that as well, based on our research, because we've done a lot of research on culture and sustainability, as I mentioned in the beginning. And in our research, what we're finding is that there are factors that if you already have those factors in your culture, it'll make your sustainability journey easier. And one of those is trust, which we talked about. Another is the capability that you have within your company to collaborate across boundaries. Siloed companies have a hard time with sustainability, especially when it gets to the integrated reporting phase, which is another topic for another day. But and there's a number of things that if you already have a strong foundation in your culture, you're going to be better off in terms of getting to your sustainability strategy. And the other thing that we find, though, and this is interesting, complex but interesting, is once a company commits to sustainability, especially as they move through efficiency and innovation, that commitment and those activities that go with that commitment in turn impacts the culture in a positive way. So that you start with a strong foundation, ideally, then you build on that foundation with your sustainability implementation, and that in turn makes the culture even stronger. So it's kind of cyclical. It's been very fascinating. We're trying to tease out exactly how that occurs now.
We've got another, it was a two-part question that I'm sorry I didn't actually fully complete the second part of it. And it's, do the efforts and plans that you're doing around sustainability translate into changes of perception of sustainability, or are the public perceptions of distrust so robust that the sustainability plans really don't matter in organizations? Not in your organization, but in organizations in general.
Well, one of the big ahas that in the 4 years that I've been in the role is we've done the Trust Barometer, as Alan said, for a number of years. But the big aha about a year or two ago was that purpose had now moved to an expectation of the stakeholders. So that in itself said a lot about where citizenship has come and where it's going. And then in fact, a grid that's also there is that purpose is now just an expectation, but a lot of companies are underperforming on it.
Yeah, look, I would add a point here, which is, Michael, can you have the camera? Thanks, buddy. Which is increasingly stakeholders expect you to conduct your business, deliver on your core competencies as a business, so the what you do as a business. They also look at how you're doing that. And those narratives, what I like to call the kind of product and brand narrative, is really merged now with the corporate narrative, what you do and how you do it. And I think that as companies, progressive companies, link the what they do and how they do it together transparently and expressly, they tend to build trust over time.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, we're almost coming to the end of our time. Any last questions that anyone wants to take advantage of our time with? And if not, Kathi, maybe I'll hand it back to you to wrap things up.
Thanks again, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate your coming, asking good, thought-provoking questions, and thank you to the folks from Edelman. We are so appreciative of all you've done to help us with our research, as well as to share your thoughts today with the audience. You'll notice that we did have a question earlier about will we be sharing the PowerPoints, and yes, we are. You should see on your screen now, you should see participant files with the Edelman webinar presentation PDF, which you can download. And we can leave the room open for a little while after we close here in a couple minutes, so that it'll give you a chance to download that file if you'd like to do so. And of
You
course,
can also go to edelman.com and search Trust Barometer and pull down the full results of this year's study and the previous 15 years.
and it's fascinating. I think I've read all of them. The latest one is especially interesting, I think. The 2015 one is especially interesting. It's also fun just to see what's happened over time with that Trust Barometer. So by all means, take advantage of that. And if you have any questions for us, you can get in touch with us. My email is Kathi@millerconsultants.com. There's a lot of Kathys in our company, as you can see. So by all means, get in touch with us, get in touch with the Edelmans if you have anything that you'd like to pursue or any follow-up questions that you have for us. I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll let all of you know when we come up with our next CSO webinar.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.